A little video here before I put all the parts in the cleaning solution. I've got the movement just tacked back together here with just a few of the gear wheels in it. And I wanted to take another look at why this movement runs for a month. What little bit has been done to it to make it a month-long movement compared to an ordinary 8-day clock. And so I've assembled the parts that are important for determining some of the elements of the runtime, and I'm going to do a quick demo here of those. And the first thing we want to look at is the relationship of the hour hand to the great wheel. On your typical 8-day American clock, the great wheel makes roughly 1 turn per day. There's a little bit of leeway plus or minus there, but that's the general arrangement on one of those clocks. And on the strike side, it's the same deal. In fact, on that last clock, American clock I did, the Gilbert clock, the count wheel was attached directly to the great wheel, and the count wheel was arranged to where the count wheel made a full revolution in 24 hours. On most clocks, the count wheel is geared so that it makes 1 turn every 12 hours. But on the Gilbert clock, all the slots 1 through 12, repeated twice, and it was attached directly to the great wheel, a very typical Gilbert feature. So how was this movement, how was it modified, the gearing ratios, to allow for 1 month of operation with a spring not much longer than a conventional 8-day clock spring? Well, let's take a look here, and as you can see, the spoke with the click is at right angles to the edge of the movement plate, and the hour hand is pointing straight up and down. So let's see how many revolutions the hour hand makes for the great wheel to make 1 revolution back to this point. Okay, there's 1, 2, 3, 4. Alright, you see it's traveled a little bit. If I back up, you see it would actually be a little less than 4. So, almost twice the gear reduction between the time indicated and the great wheel. So that's about half the number of revolutions that the spring is unwinding. What we're going to do over here, here's the slot. This would be the 12 o'clock strike, and that would be 12:31 and 1:30 there. So the spoke nearest that, you see the click is directly underneath it. So we'll see how many times this makes a revolution per revolution there. See, that's 1, 2, 3, 4. There again, you see that if we go back to where it's at right angles again, not quite 4 revolutions, just like with the time side. So, very interesting arrangement of gearing here. I think it's pretty clever. It would have been neat to see some actual American-made movements with this same arrangement, to have a month clock instead of a typical 8-day or 1-week clock. I think there would have probably been a little bit of in the traditional clock-making manner, there would have been a little bit of, it probably would have been called like a 35-day clock or a 31-day clock, like the Korean clocks are called. Although I think a 35-day clock would be interesting, because most clocks, a clock made to be wound every day is usually called a 30-hour clock, because it gives you 6 extra hours for a little bit of leeway with the winding. Some clocks were even very generous on that. 8-day clocks are obviously 1-week clocks with a whole extra day to allow for leeway and winding. And then for a 1-month clock, well, most months are, 30, 31 days. I guess you could say technically 4 weeks is 28 days. You could also call that a month, although it wouldn't really be a month. So 30 days would be a little bit generous if you wound the clock every 4th week. But a 1-month clock, really, you'd think in the traditional clock-making sense, would be a 35-day clock. And you've got to wonder what they would have done back in the 1890s, 1880s, 1890s, 1900s, had they come up with a 1-month clock, instead of an 8-day clock, what the actual designation would have been. And I still find this interesting too, the 3 lifting pins and 3 locking slots on this. So not only are you getting some gearing changes here, but you're also getting some gearing changes here, less total rotation in the rest of the gear train, so the gear ratios are not quite as high as they would normally be, even with that. So very interesting stuff. Anyway, this is all very interesting stuff, I think, but we'll call this video 5.5 since it's not really, or is it 6.5? I don't know. I think it's part 5.5. It's just a sort of side detour to kind of explore a little bit more of what was done to modify an 8-day movement to run for a month. And the answer is slightly longer springs that are a little bit heavier, though not much. I gotta say, these springs are still pretty thin. And main wheels, or great wheels as I like to call them, that run at half the speed of the normal 8-day clock. And as I said, an 8-day clock in tip-top shape, you can oftentimes get about 2 weeks of runtime out of one. So with these modifications to the gearing, to get a month instead of 2 weeks of runtime, I think is pretty nifty, and makes a clock that's very convenient to use. You just wind it once a month. And anyway, enough of this. I'm going to take this back apart and we'll clean the main springs and clean all the movement parts. And the next part, which will be part 6, I believe, unless I've miscounted, we will be looking at the clean parts and probably go ahead and reassemble it, since there's not really any additional adjustments or anything that need to be done on this clock. It just needs to be cleaned now and put back together. So this is Oklahoma Bridges, and hope you didn't mind this little detour. Thanks for watching.